Great, let's jump in. So, today I'm going to be talking about design and AI, which it seems like 2026 is kind of the main thing that everybody always talks about. But this is something that really is changing a lot of things in the industry and in a bunch of ways that people are still trying to figure out and will probably be figuring out for many years to come, actually. Whenever a large new technological shift comes in, our processes change and the things that we're designing changes and some of the pieces of how we design things change. And so we can think about this as kind of my take from working with a lot of different companies over the last several years and kind of, from the field, kind of how things are evolving a little bit with some advice. So my name is Kyle. I am a designer and strategist and researcher, and I've been doing this work. Actually, it's a little old. I've been doing this for more than 15 years now, and my career has taken me very many places in the world. I've worked in Asia and Africa, several places in the Americas, done a lot of finance and a lot of other things. I worked for Frog Design, which is a consulting company that's kind of given me a lot of different, worked in telco, worked in retail, worked in, a whole bunch of different things. Um, and so it's really been a fun ride of learning a whole bunch of different things. In the past several years, today I freelance. So I've worked with, I don't know, probably 10 or 20 different companies over the last 4 or 5 years. And many of them have been AI companies. So some of them doing like enterprise AI, like Vidoso and Protect AI and Quantified. Some of them doing actual like AI research, which is what Lightning AI was, which was a company where AI researchers and AI engineers are building AI stuff. And then also recently and still currently working with a company called Rebind, which is an AI consumer company where they're building a consumer facing app that uses AI in the background. And so it's been kind of interesting sort of seeing this technology kind of ripple through the environment since I guess over the past 6 years. I was working for Lightning 6 years ago now. And it's interesting to see how companies are sort of responding and changing and how that relationship between those companies and designers, people with design in their title has changed. And so I'll talk about that a little bit today. So there's kind of two pieces of AI and design that we need to be thinking about. One is using AI in our design process, and then the other is designing AI products or products, I would usually say AI experiences, products that use AI to do something that's fundamental to the product experience itself. And we can think about those in a few different ways. So I'd love to just get a feel for the room. I don't know what everybody's studying here. How many people are studying like design, like is your major, like UX design or something like that? Okay, so there's a few. Um, how about like industrial design or other types of design?
Industrial.
Yeah. How about business? Are there business majors in there? Okay, awesome. Computer science, computer science folks, other people in anthropology, sociology. Cool. This is not going to get very technical. We'll get into business a little bit. Um, so one of the things that we might kind of ask ourselves, both from a business perspective and from a sort of like designer perspective, is, is cursor the end of design? Lots of people, if you spend much time on LinkedIn, like professional going to conferences and stuff, Chicken Little, the sky is falling, everything is going to change. Uh, these things are overblown and kind of silly. I should probably update this slide. I think cursor is not the thing. Now it's Claude Design has just released something like last week. And so maybe I would ask its Claude Code the end of design. And I think the answer is a resounding no. So in my 15 years or so, we have used so many different tools over time. Um, Adobe Illustrator was my life when I started my career. Then we used something called Sketch, and now we use something called Figma. And sort of like the tools and like tactical day to day of things basically changes about every 2 or 3 years. And even the kind of like tactical things that we're doing, the tasks that we're doing sort of changes every day, or every few years, really. I would say there's kind of different phases. But ultimately, it is still kind of the same process. So for the past several years, what a lot of us have spent a lot of time doing is like wrestling with these really boring kind of tactical things about figuring out what color all of the buttons are and making sure that we have all of that stuff lined up in Figma and everything else like that. Um, and a lot of the industry has sort of built up around these very distinct roles. Like this person is a design researcher, and that person works on what's called the toolkit, which for people who don't work in design is like a really big computer file that has like all of the different variants of your buttons and stuff like that. Like this is all of the different states that a search bar has. Really like hyper detailed practical stuff. And what I'm starting to see and very much I'm hoping for is that AI is starting to take a lot of those very boring tactical pieces of the day to day of being a designer and kind of get rid of them, which is wonderful because that shit sucks. Like you spend so much time doing like really boring crap because it does need to be done for a good product to emerge, but it is very tedious and very detail oriented. And so the question that we ask ourselves, though, especially for a lot of people, both who are sort of in the mid stage of their careers and also people who are starting their careers, is what does design work actually look like in this new world? Do we still need design? Do we still need designers? A lot of times we talk about the difference between what design, like the verb is, what does it mean to design, versus what the industry of design is. The industry being people where it says designer on their business card, or an organization in the business called design, or a conference about design, or design day, like today, is, design is a sociological construct as well as a verb that means to create things. And so as design as AI starts to ripple through the industry, this is one of the questions that I think a lot of us are trying to ask ourselves and really trying to figure out. So this marks a pretty important shift that hopefully as students, you're already kind of thinking about a little bit. For people in the industry, it's a little bit more of a difficult shift because industry moves slow. When you're young and you're a student, you can think about these things in very abstract ways and in a lot of detail, but organizations are quite clunky. If they hire a bunch of people for the design department and study the role of design changes, then it's hard for them to shift and try to figure out what's next. But this is the change that I think is going to be occurring. And in some of the more forward-looking startups, this is what's already occurring. The big shift is this. There is the craft in design, which is really getting the details right. Your research is user testing, you're sketching things pixel by pixel in Figma or, something like that. You're getting all the buttons looking right. You're building out these like extensive toolkits and everything like that, getting all of the typography right and everything. But I think the shift as we are starting to be able to rely on AI to track down all of these details and get it all aligned and figured out better for us is that we can refocus and reshift back to strategy. Strategy is really more where we're trying to figure out what to make. The research that we're doing is exploratory and generative research. We're doing a lot more ideation sessions and keeping that ideation as something that the humans are still doing because we have the context. Finding the right metaphors and the experience narratives to figure out like whatever this object is, how are we going to describe it to people? And of course, doing some of the things that we always have done, which is journey maps, personas, and all of this kind of stuff. This is not the first time that we've had a big shift in the industry. This will date me a little bit, but when I started my career, there was two big pieces of technology that we were all trying to figure out. The first was cloud, because everybody was getting used to the fact that somebody in some server far away was where the data was going to live, not like on our physical device. And I remember doing a project for AT&T at the time who thought that they were going to become the major cloud provider. We all can see how that turned out. And then the second was mobile. Suddenly, all of these websites, people were trying to look at them on phones. And that was something very new. The iPhone came out when I was in college, but back then, only rich people could afford it. By the time I started my career, pretty much anybody could afford a smartphone. And so everybody was trying to figure out how are we going to shift the experiences that we're having from being like websites to being native phone applications that normal humans were going to use and like try to navigate with their thumbs. And the industry kind of like went up and down and it was crazy and everybody thought it was the end of the world and suddenly it wasn't. And we all kind of settled into the next way of doing things. The thing that hasn't changed in my career and probably isn't going to change anytime soon is that design is still and will probably always be about finding what that bridge is between technology and humans. Because when we think about things from an engineering frame, we're thinking very different from when we're thinking from the human frame, the anthropological frame, the sociological frame, and everything like that. And that bridge there continues to be important. And I would argue that as we start to wrap our heads around what AI is and how AI works, and more importantly, I think what AI isn't, because right now AI is everything and it's going to change the world and it's going to be amazing, just like the metaverse and NFTs before that. Over time, we'll start to figure out what AI isn't. And as we start to discover these things, that's where design is going to be really important to figure out what are the types of experiences that we actually want to have here. And that understanding still comes from different from these things. Design is always about understanding. It's always about context. It's always about technology. It's always about users, and it's always about business models. This will always be true. And it's also always being great at sketching, storytelling, and framing things and reframing things. Sometimes what it means to sketch is different. My degree is actually in industrial design. I'm really good at sketching things with markers. I have never used that in my career. I've always worked in digital stuff. Um, Sometimes, we're telling stories with videos. Sometimes we're telling stories with storyboards. Sometimes we're just standing up and giving presentations. But it's always going to be about trying to quickly figure out what different options are so that we can have discussions with people about what we want to create. So these things are always going to change. So with that, I want to jump to what are the aspects of this new technology that we want to consider. By the way, at the end, I should have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions, please start jotting them down now. um, okay, so what are some aspects of this new technology that we need to consider? There's probably two big presentations that I could give, but I'm not going to give both of them right now. But the two things that we need to be thinking about are bot in the background, which is we're using AI in the background of products to figure out how we can streamline things, and bot in the foreground, which is when the actual experiences that we're creating are going to feel like they're AI to the customer. So these two things really overlap quite a bit, but it's useful to think of them as kind of distinctly two different things when we're thinking about design processes and what those like experiences should be. I'm going to talk more about bot in the foreground today, but if anybody wants to talk about bot in the background, Q&A would be a great time to do it. So I'm going to do a quick case study on Rebind, which is one of the clients that I've had this past really about 2 years. So Rebind is an AI-driven experience to help people read hard books. And they're really focused on like philosophy books, spiritual books, classics. Working on a big project with the Bible right now, basically things that require a lot of interpretation, where when somebody sits down and they read a book, it's not always going to be obvious or jump off of the page, like what the meaning is of the thing that they're reading. So think about it as like Kindle with AI. So one of the things that we have to figure out here is how should we pull this together? Specifically, what this company has is proprietary content about these things. They sat down and they interviewed a bunch of experts about, this one is Nietzsche, for example, Das Buch Zarathustra. And they sat there and interviewed college professors for like 30 or 40 hours about what everything in this book means. And that proprietary content has become their value proposition, kind of their core moat in the business marketplace. Anybody can be AI, but what they have is all of this proprietary content that matches up with these really difficult books. So the question now becomes, how can we make this content available to people in a way where it sort of feels natural as they're working through the books and reading through the books and everything like that? So chat was one of the first things here that they were trying to figure out, like, hey, can I highlight something from the book, ask a question about it, and have one of these experts, these rebinders, kind of give me an answer. And that answer would be based off of the interviews that we did with them. Essentially taking a large piece of unstructured content or semi-structured content and pulling it into a front-end experience where you can get like exactly the thing that you want at exactly the right time. And you know that it's coming from experts, essentially. So we face some of the same old questions that digital companies always have. How do we make the app sticky and what do users care about and everything like that? But, and probably 50 other things. But some of the new questions that are interesting with AI are, how many characters are there here? Is there one bot or many bots? Obviously, in the background, there's an ensemble of bots doing things. But for the front end experience, like how do we want to build this metaphor? How is this better than ChatGPT? This is a question that I think all AI companies, especially like consumer facing AI companies, are trying to think about right now. Like ChatGPT is pretty good, gets better every day. Claude, Gemini, all of these kinds of things. And so if you're trying to make an AI experience that is something specific, where do you find that differentiation? Do users like AI? Like, it's really appealing to everybody in industry, but do end users actually like it? And then how do we communicate to people what's going on? Because design is always about some layer of abstraction between the technology and the user. And the real science of getting that abstraction right is what a lot of the design process is about. So the second question was like, what is the experience that we want? We want people to interact with a lot of content. We want to encourage people to like journal and reflect. We want to have mashups, like different, expert rebinders kind of talking to each other over time. We want to help people answer simple questions without leaving our app, because anytime somebody leaves your app, they might not ever come back. So we want to sort of keep people in our app. And then one of the real big things that we, wanted to make sure we were doing was letting the real data shine. So it's nice to have like a chatbot, ChatGPT, or somebody like that giving an answer to somebody quickly. And a lot of times that's what you want. But because we have this proprietary data, and that proprietary data was like our differentiator against other apps, we wanted to make sure that we were always sort of calling that data to the front and making sure that users were being reminded all of the time that this is what we're doing here. So we started kind of like anyone should start every design project if you can. We did some interviews with about 30 potential users. And these were the things that we found out that kind of shaped how we thought about pulling this product together and actually orchestrating the experience that we wanted. Note that these are fake pictures of real people. So all of these quotes are real, but I don't want to share pictures of the real people. So these are AI generated pictures of real things from real research. The first thing that we learned in our research was that AI is not a value proposition for these particular users. For people who resonated with the value proposition of our app, they did not like the idea of AI. There's a lot of nuance to this that I won't get into right now, but let's just say that putting AI on our advertisements would not be the right answer. Most people had used AI, they liked it for certain things, but they're very skeptical of it. And a lot of what they were specifically skeptical of, as people who are reading dense, deep books and who want to think spiritually or think philosophically, is, the AI can hallucinate, and it's most likely to hallucinate with something that should be spiritual or philosophical. Like this is complex stuff, and they don't trust AI to do it. Another question that we have, kind of the opposite of that, is why wouldn't your users just use ChatGPT? And the answer is that data was the differentiation. So this was true at this company, and I will say pretty objectively across the board, data is the differentiator. All AI questions when it comes to business are not AI questions. They are data questions. AI is pretty much a commodity now. And so data is always going to be the differentiator. In this case, data was the differentiator for the people that we talked to because they wanted to have these deeper experiences and they wanted to know that they were talking to experts about these complex things. And so when we come out and say, like, there's expert content in this app, people really love that. When we said The AI will answer questions. People did not like that. And so, but when then we sort of switch the metaphor, the AI will be a curator for you to sort through these expert uh, content, then people really like that. So the data is the differentiator. And what that means really when we're thinking about the app experience is how do we make sure that people understand that this is, this data that they're working with is coming from real experts? How do we put in pictures? How do we put in their names? How do we put in their credentials? How do we distinguish between things that the bot has said and the expert commentary has said? As we're thinking about all of the touch points in this experience, we're really trying to keep that top of mind as a design principle so we can think about continually reinforcing that idea in the user's mind. Another thing is that AI is great for searching in the background. One thing that is a magical, wonderful thing about 2026 that was not at all true even in 2020 and definitely not in 2015 is that data is much more fungible now. It used to be that anything that you tried to do in building software was hard because that data, this database is structured in a different way from that database, which is structured differently from that database, and all of it is a mess. And it's going to take like 20 engineers and 12 months and 200,000, not 200,000, more like $2 million to sort it all out. AI is fantastic at solving this problem. When you have a database that kind of looks like this and one that kind of looks like that, or when you say like, hey, here's 40 hours of content of somebody speaking, but we actually want to just pull out the things that have to do with like this one topic from all of those different hours. AI is fantastic about going through, pulling out the relevant things, arranging them in a way that makes sense, and then kind of filling in the gaps between those things. So, for example, here is a conversation between this person and that person about something that happened in this book. And these people have never talked to each other. But both of these are real transcripts from real people talking about these things. And AI is able to sort of remix and put these things together in interesting ways that creates amazing content. But it's also able to do it in a way that's quite efficient relative to what we were doing before. Another thing that it's able to do is it's able to personalize content really well. So it's difficult if you don't know your user very well to be able to create something that feels like it's a personalized experience that's bridging to the content that you have. But AI is quite good at that. Once it has some data about a user and some data about, in this case, it's content, but it's really like whatever data, belongs to the app, whether it's finance or health or whatever. Bridging that gap, AI is fantastic at that. Because again, it's sort of standing off the edges that make these things hard to put together. And then the last thing that we thought a lot about, and I think is always going to be an interesting question as we think through these, is choosing your metaphor. So when it comes to AI, there's a lot that you can do, but getting your metaphor right, and this is something that I'm going to talk more about here in a couple of minutes, is really, really important. So for us, we kind of went through a few phases. The first thing that we did was have the rebinders, the experts, say everything. And so we would kind of stitch together these long pieces of text where what they really were was like different things that the experts had said, and we kind of like fill in some cartilage between the different pieces to sort of make it coherent. But it didn't work. So the next thing that we did was we introduced a character, and this character is called Raya, the Rebind AI assistant. And basically what Raya did was sort of become a facilitator. So our first metaphor is like you are talking to the expert, but it felt really awkward. It didn't work out. It's hard to wrangle the data to make it make sense. And it felt kind of dishonest because you aren't talking to the expert. And also because we're putting in some cartilage. So everything wasn't exactly what they had said. With the introduction of Raya as an assistant, kind of curator, moderator type of thing, we were able to do something really cool, which was we have AI, we're AI forward, but AI is not the value proposition. So you ask a question, Raya answers a little bit, kind of like morphing the question into something that matches up with our content. And then the rebinder, you can see here, it says speaker attribution because these are designs from Figma, but this was a real expert that we had, then comes in with their chunk of authentic content that we had from them. And so this is one of those places where we're like going back and forth trying to figure out what the metaphor is, where it's something that makes sense to the user, really supports our value proposition, and is also possible from an engineering perspective to pull off. And so this is going to be different for different companies that have different data and different types of value propositions, but it's something that I think is central to the design process. And then once we actually translate into design, there's a lot of little details that we think about as well. So for example, one of the things that we had in the first version of this was this screen here, where you ask a question, you get a response back, and like Raya says something, and the rebinder has said something else. This is literally what's happening from an engineering perspective, because what's actually happening is the user asks a question, sends it off as a query, the AI crunches all of it, pulls some data from, our commentary database, pulls, fills in some gaps and everything like that, and we get the whole thing back from an engineering perspective as one response. However, and so we're like, well, it doesn't make sense for you to rate this and rate this because it's one response. But from a user's perspective, these are two voices that are having a conversation. This actually feels like two pieces of input, not one piece of input. And so one tiny detail here that it's kind of not super noticeable, but like it supports our metaphor is that you can like or dislike something that Raya says or something that a rebinder says. Even though this is from an engineering perspective, all the same thing, from a user perspective and that user metaphor perspective, these are two different things. And we want to make sure that that metaphorical reality is what's pulling through into the interface design itself. So this is something where, it takes a little while to settle on your metaphor, but you'll find your metaphor. But then once you do that, there's about a million details that you have to think through to make sure you're supporting your metaphor. And the one thing that I would say about this too is like, you can imagine a person who it seems like 95% of the time they're being honest and authentic, but 5% of the time they're not. It feels really disorienting. And that's what it's like when you kind of get your metaphor wrong within an experience, is it something feels a little off. And those are the kind of subtle distinctions that can be a major difference between users and really liking something and it feeling natural and something feeling unnatural. So the big piece here that I think is important for us as designers to think through is shifting metaphors. Luckily, you are all students, so you probably don't have a lot of bad habits that you need to get rid of. But there is a new way of thinking about design that's kind of an old way that I think we need to bring back a little bit. Um, so how do we build great differentiated AI experiences? So the old metaphors are still valuable. They're still important. One metaphor that we have is like the control board. This, as I emerged into the world with my industrial design degree and then got a design doing digital stuff, this was kind of a big metaphor. It was like, instead of designing control panels, it's all just on the touch screen now. And we still have this a lot. We have like literal toggles and like buttons and stuff. Another one is like menus, like menu at a restaurant, a menu on Airbnb, pretty much the same thing. You're flipping through, you're looking at pictures, you're deciding what you want, and then maybe you ask some questions about that thing. But for AI agent experiences, we have to shift the metaphor. Sentient employees learn. So this is something that's quite different from everything that we were doing before. Before, like, yeah, maybe Instagram learns about you a little bit, but in a much less forward way than what it was before. So here, the metaphors that we're actually looking at are like service industries. What is a hairdresser experience like? What is a tutor experience like? What is an accountant experience like? And what we can really do now is think about switching this to my. There's a big difference between a tutor and my tutor, an accountant and my accountant, a hairdresser and my hairdresser. And really, the next time you go get a haircut, or the next time you take your car into the shop, think about those differences, like the difference between somebody who really knows you and somebody who doesn't. Because this way of thinking is how we need to be thinking about digital experiences moving forward. So I kind of asked the wrong question. The real question that we won't do a show of hands, but for everybody to think to themselves is, How many people in the room have worked a service job? Have you ever worked a hotel desk? Have you ever been a barista? Have you ever been a bartender? These are the kinds of jobs that really teach us a lot about what it's like to interact with the customer. Because this is not like we're friends. We do have distinct roles that we're playing, but we need to understand what the pieces of information are that are passed back and forth between a person and somebody giving the service to really think through this. A human gives generic thoughts and advice. A professional gives thoughts and advice based on the expertise that they have. And my professional gives me expert advice based on the context, knowledge that they have about me. This is the major difference between the old way that people built software, honestly, and the way that we need to be building it now. So think a little bit about how employees are trained. Uh, Sentient employees, real humans, have a knowledge about the industry that they're a part of. So when you're building your apps, you need to be thinking about that. What is the relative, like the important industry data that we need to be thinking about? Employees have knowledge of the specific business that they're a part of. So if I'm building a finance app, it's not just information about finance, but it's also information about the the bank that I'm building this app for. How are they different from other banks? What is their differentiation there? They have knowledge about the customer, because as people interact with things, they're putting off data exhaust all the time. Not only like hard things, like this is how much money is in their bank account, but also soft things, like this is the way that they think about finance. And then there's the ability to set expectations with customers based on the business's capabilities. This is huge. And when it comes to actually orchestrating your AI experiences, this is a major, major thing. You can imagine what it's like to walk into a McDonald's and order a pizza and have the person behind the counter be like, no problem, your pizza's coming right up. And then later figure out that the organization of McDonald's cannot deliver me a pizza. Like these things do not make sense. When you're training your AI bot, you need to make sure that it understands what the business is capable of, and it's capable of setting those expectations with your end user. This gets into design. We're not going to get into like prompt engineering and the way all this kind of stuff works from a technical perspective, but um, trust me, this is the kinds of things that we think about when we're designing for AI. How are we orchestrating that information exchange in the background for what the bots are actually seeing and doing, so that when it gets to the front end experience, it feels coherent and cohesive and honest to a user. We need to think about trust in a sophisticated way. So I usually think about trust as meaning three things. One is trustworthiness. Like, do I believe that this experience is acting in my best interest? One is transparency. Do I understand how this thing is working? And then one is capability. Do I know that this thing can do the thing that I want? Asking for a pizza at McDonald's, this is a capabilities thing, right? I need somebody to tell me that this organization is not capable of doing this thing. Trustworthiness is like the person behind the cash register is going to rip me off. And then transparency is like nobody knows that there's a bunch of roaches in the back, like all of these things come together to mean this word that we call trust. And when it comes to design, we're really trying to orchestrate things in a way that we have the right amount of transparency and we're telling the users what we're actually capable of. So where are the biggest opportunities to create differentiated AI experiences today? What I would say is context is key. Again, the difference between an accountant and my accountant is context. So when a user asks a question, there's a range of answers that is immense. This is another challenge that we have when we're dealing with AI, because the AI can answer anything, but it can't answer everything honestly or in the way that we want it if we're trying to channel it into a specific business. So what we have to ask ourselves, and what design is always a question of what good is. In this context, what is good? In this context, it is how do we define a good answer? So for Rebind, how do we give an answer to a question that is differentiated and is going to be good? I'm going to peek behind the curtain a little bit to talk about what's actually happening when we talk about AI. So luckily, a lot of people are in our school, and they know that this is not a pipe. This is an image of a pipe. And they probably know that this is not an engine. This is an image of an engine. And likewise, it's important to know that this is not a product. Um, Even when you see one robot, Raya, our bot experience in Rebind, Raya is not a robot. Raya is actually many different queries, an ensemble of AI models passing information around and doing a bunch of stuff in the background. On the front end, the user is going to input something, and they might input some of their goals in their background, and then we're going to take some data that we have about them, and we're going to take some data that's proprietary data the company has. We're going to engineer some prompts to personalize things using whichever model they are. Then we're going to feed that into a front-end experience, and we're going to combine that with all of these different pieces and different things and pull it all together. And that's going to feel like one coherent answer from a robot. There's a lot of different things that are kind of flowing around, and every piece of the pipeline like impacts that experience. If it all goes well, it feels like you're talking to a robot. But if something breaks in the background, it's going to be very apparent that like this metaphor that we had is not really working. For me to know what a good answer is, I need to know who this person is. Uh, are they a student? In this case, for like a difficult reading app, are they a student? Do they like to read, or are they being forced to read? What level of education have they attained? Are they a Buddhist? This example, we're talking about some historical Buddhist texts. Like, are they a Buddhist, or have they studied this, or are they kind of new to this idea? Have they ever read the book before? Are they reading it again, or is this their first time? Why are they reading it? What are their goals? Are they reading it with other people? All of these things are context that helps me answer that very simple question of when somebody asks, what does this mean? For me to be able to give a good answer. Think about the way that your teachers will give you a good answer if they know who you are as a student. It's the same with all of the AI forward experiences that we have. Context is key. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I would say that this is kind of like the things that I would think about always trying to figure out from a user. Their location, their goals, their worldview, their social factors, and their timing. Hopefully, as design students, you all think a lot about worldview. It's probably the most important thing to be very sophisticated in thinking about as you come out of design school, because worldviews from different people are very different. And usually designing a great experience has a lot to do with, you know, being able to understand somebody else's worldview, having that cognitive empathy to understand the differences between different worldviews and how to suit each of them. To deliver a good AI experience, I always think of it using this model, which is there's the data, the model, and the interface. We won't get into the details, but this is a great way of thinking about the different components that make up AI. And a lot of us think about how we feed data into a model, feed that into an interface, and then the user does it. But to really build those differentiated experiences, we also need users to be feeding data into interfaces, and then being able to pass that through the model to have this cyclical relationship back and forth where users are giving us data, we're giving them things back to them, and we're negotiating that process. And what I will say here, but not pontificate on, is there are many ethical implications to where that data lives, what data you're collecting, and the transparency with which you're telling users how you're going to be using that data. But you can't have personalized experiences without it. So this is another thing that is very, 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 very worth your time to be thinking about how data works and how do we want to use data in an ethical way. UX strategy is the core to context. So now I'm going to tell you to do everything that you already were probably going to do. Conduct a lot of user research. It absolutely matters now more than ever. Get deep in to people's processes and the way they think when you're doing this user research. You're still going to be trying to map things. You're still going to be able to draw things and really trying to understand users' mental models as best that you can. Create personas. Personas continue to be more like extremely important in this for all of the reasons that they always were. Continue to make journey maps. These, again, are super important today, especially as we're switching towards thinking about things a little bit more like services and less like control panels. The understanding that we have of how people flow through a system and the expectations that they have interacting with different humans becomes way more important than it was before. And then also understand app touch points. So really try to think about those hooks. Where are we pulling in data from users? Where are we having them tell us what their expectations are? And how are we making it transparent to them that the more data they give us, the more we're going to reward them with a personalized experience that's better than something that they could get somewhere else. And lastly, enlist your users to help you. Again, people want good things. And so it's really important to try to get them to do things. So I'm going to wrap this up by just blasting through 5 questions for AI experiences. So as you start working with companies, start working in your first jobs, when people are just like, yeah, AI, it's going to be magic, or we can do anything. These are the 5 questions that you should think about as you're designing AI experiences. One, what data does the business have? 2, what data do we need from the user? 3, how can the bot empathize with the user? 4, how can the user empathize with the bot? And then 5, what is our metaphor? So first, what data does the business have? This is the differentiator, I think all of the time, at least 90% of the time. The companies with the best data will be able to offer the best products if they can orchestrate those into good experiences. So really think about what proprietary data your company or whatever it is has, and how you can use that to create a great personalized experience. 2 is, what data do we need from the user? We don't need to know everything from the user, but we do need to understand the things that will help them create a differentiated experience. My hairdresser doesn't need to know my wife's favorite color. They do need to know what I think a good haircut is. And so think about how we're going to design experiences where we're pulling in that data from users. 3 is, how can the bot empathize with the user? So I always like to define empathy. Empathy does not mean sympathy. Empathy means the capacity to understand another person's point of view or the result of such understanding. Understanding somebody else's mental model is extremely important. In this case, what we need to figure out is, how can I tell the bot what the user's mental model is? How do they see the world? And how can I communicate that to the bot? How does the bot empathize? How do we get enough data in so that the bot knows how to talk to that person? The second thing, or the fourth thing or whatever, is the opposite of that. But first on this, like, this is a slide I love to show. This is personal finance. These are all personal finance gurus, and they're all extremely different. But they all do basically the same thing. It's all the same information. It's just that this guy is like, hey, do you want a Lamborghini? Here's what to do. And this woman is like, hey, do you want to be a practical female that's good at finance? You know, listen to this girl. If you want to be like left, hard left feminist, you can listen to this person. If you want to be like a nerdy guy, you can listen to that person. But they all have the same information, just different flavors, different branded flavors of the same information. So when we're trying to tell the bot how the user wants their information to come, this is why these mental models are so important. We can personalize it and give them the type of information that they want. How can the user empathize with the bot? This is something that I think is underthought a little bit. So this is when you talk to somebody, you also want to understand where they're coming from and what their mental model is and how they're supposed to be communicating with you. So imagine this. A human says, what do you think? And this is who she's talking to. What are the expectations that that user is going to have for the person that they're talking to? The dog is not going to understand anything. The dog is just like, oh, this person is talking to me. But what if we change the person to this? Now, what do we think this woman is thinking when she says those words? I'm talking to somebody. How are they going to respond? What are they going to be thinking? Or this person? These are very different, right? This is, well, what do you think? Can I go outside? What do you think? This situation, what do you think? Or that situation. All of these might be the same words, but what's going on in this person's head as she speaks to them is very different depending on who she's talking to. A bot is a blank slate. We have no idea who we're talking to when we talk to this bot. We don't know the type of relationship that we're supposed to have. In my example from before with Rebind, the example was, well, we had to think about it. We're like, is Raya an expert, or is Raya a curator, or is Raya a librarian? Or is Raya your friend? We have to invent that from scratch. And then we need to set those expectations with users so that the way that they frame questions is going to make sense. And we need to make that a little bit transparent. When they're going to ask that bot a question, we need to show them at least enough to where they're saying, like, okay, this bot is like a librarian and she's going to go to the library and she's going to curate some content and feed it back to me. We have to construct this character. They don't come from nowhere. And if we don't construct the character, it's going to feel like ChatGPT. And then the last is pick the metaphor, kind of like I was saying before. One really important way to build that empathy is to do this. And a big question here too is to think about a promise that you can keep. Think again about the McDonald's person when I asked them for a pizza. They might really want to give me a pizza. They might see that I would love a pizza and that I'm standing there with money and I'm wanting a pizza, but they can't keep that promise to me. Bots do not know the promises that they can keep unless we orchestrate them in a way to where they understand what data they have, what the role is that they're playing, and to whom they are acting upon. And so this is super, super important. So to wrap up here, I want to just kind of stress that like the reality is the start of your career is going to look very different from the start of mine. But in a lot of ways, it's going to be the same. This is a quote from Herb Simon. Hopefully, all of you know who he is and you have read all of his books. But he says the correct reasoning is a grand system of tautologies, but only God can make use of that fact. The rest of us must painstakingly and infallibly tease out the consequences of our assumptions. This is the design process. We don't know what we're building whenever we start the design process. That's why the design process exists. That's from a book called The Sciences of the Artificial, which I highly suggest. The key word in this is artificial. As designers, we are making up things that don't exist, and we're making them up in ways so that we can plan how we want them to be. And that is never going to change. Whether we're role playing the way that we want a bot to be, or we are building paper prototypes, or we're coding things with Claude that are going to be thrown away, but they're still prototypes. It's always about stimulating things so we can decide what we want. So the fundamental process of design is going to be the same, even if our tools change and even if the technology that we're designing changes. So I wanted to do Q&A, but I think we have like 2 minutes. I apologize for rambling for such a long time. But in our last couple of minutes, the floor is yours. Any questions, thoughts, things that you hate? I'm not able to call on you or see if people are raising their hand. So maybe somebody can direct or shout things out or something like that.
I'm super curious. You said you're working on the Bible, and the nice thing about the Bible is everyone agrees on how it's read, and there's a lot of consistency, and it's super straightforward. But
Mm-hmm.
like in the current political climate where you have Grok who's trying to be like the truthiest chatbot, it feels like we're in a microcosm where you get to really concentrate on how the bot focuses on, telling an objective truth, but also like leaning into what the user sort of the biases are. I guess, can you share any learnings about designing, taking all those kind of problems that you outlined in your talk, but how you're solving them in this particular context and how it might apply more broadly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I would say is we try really hard to never have the bot say something that's supposed to be truthy. Um, bots are not that good at truth. Bots are really good at sorting things and finding things. And so that's what we really focus on in that. We have a large library of content and books right now that are different thought leaders, philosophers, Christian, authors, and all of this kind of stuff. And we have a big database that has all of the things that those people have said. That is our data that we have brought in. And so what we try to do is be transparent about where all that data comes from and always position the bot, like in our case, as not the person who has truth, but the person who is helping you find this or that commentary or this or that perspective, and would also be able to help you find a different perspective. So that is the thing that we kind of try to stitch together. I think we have something like, I don't know, 4,000 different articles that we've generated from like several, like 1,000 or 2,000 books and like this kind of stuff. And so that's what we're really trying to do. It's more of like a sorting mechanism and a mechanism to personalize things. So the metaphor that we use is like you're in a vast library and you have a librarian, and the librarian will go and find the things for you, and they'll sort of bring them to you and maybe help you understand like what those words mean, but they're not going to try to be like the origin of truth for a claim that's trying to be made. Um, Part of that is because, yeah, like nobody agrees.
We're gonna read, someone else has to come in and set up the room, so we have
Yeah,
that.
no problem. Very nice to meet all of you. I hope you found something in this useful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Colin's already in here, so yeah,
So I'm actually in the same room, so I kind of.
we just leave the. I'll just
We're gonna have a presentation. You need tons.
I mean, it's just plugging in. It's literally just plug in. So